Welcome to the Kirkpatrick podcast, bridging traditions and trends in learning and performance evaluation. Whether you're a seasoned learning professional or just starting out, join us as we dive into the Kirkpatrick model like never before. Through stories and insights, we are fusing time-honored methods with cutting-edge innovations to help you navigate the ever-evolving world of learning and performance evaluation. Hey everyone, it's Jim and Vanessa. Welcome back to the Kirkpatrick podcast, and we have a very special guest today. We've got Dr. Alaina Szlachta. She is an academic turned entrepreneur and the founder of By Design Development Solutions, a data enablement strategy firm specializing in data-driven program development, assessment, and evaluation. Alaina has played nearly every role in the knowledge sector over the past 15 years, including academic researcher, professor of higher education, corporate trainer, director of training, instructional designer, and former competitive public speaker. She proudly served industries of higher education, diversity and inclusion, finance, corporate learning and development, victim services, real estate, healthcare, and SaaS. And if you are not following her on LinkedIn, you are missing out on some amazing lives during the day. So make sure you follow her on LinkedIn. Alaina, thank you so much for joining us today. I am so excited to have you. And I know that Jim is totally looking forward to this session as well. You guys can nerd out. I'll be the one missing out on the PhD, but I'm very excited for you both to nerd out on all of the evaluation. So I just want to kick off first. We heard a little bit about your bio and your background, but I want to know more about your background from your own words. Where did you get your passion for this work? And how did you really get to where you are today?
Well, first and foremost, thank you for having me on this podcast. And I'm also incredibly excited to be speaking at your summit coming up later this year. I just think all the work that the Kirkpatrick partners have done, and now Vanessa, with you being a part of this, I am just so excited to see how things unfold and happy to be on the journey here with you all. So about me, my nerdiness really began when I went and got my master's degree and then continued on to my PhD. I knew that I wanted to be a professor. And Jim, I don't know if you've had this experience, but breaking into becoming a full-time professor is actually kind of hard when you don't have any teaching experience. You have to get it somewhere. And so my opportunity was to teach the class that nobody wanted to teach, which was, drumroll, academic research methods. It was the required class for graduate level teachers getting their master's degree. They had to take this class, and it was the one opportunity I had to just jump into getting some experience at the professor level in an academic institution. And I'm so glad that I said yes to that, because it really took me down a path of merging what I think of as instructional design best practices. I mean, you can imagine it was like the toughest audience possible. People sitting in a class that they had to take. It was in some cases the first class or the last class of their entire program. And here I am. At the time I look young now. Thank you very much. But at the time I was young. Exactly. We've got great skincare regimes. But yeah, I was in my early 20s because I started graduate school really early. And so I had a hard time getting people to listen to me. And the way that I was able to do that is I clearly knew what I was talking about. And I was able to break down the concepts that are highly complex into something simple and usable. And lo and behold, those are the skill sets that make for great instructional designers in the corporate world. And so I think it was that time now, more than 15 years ago, that first class. And I can say that 2 years later, after teaching that class a few times, the students that I had in my original class came to me and they said, Alaina, we can't thank you enough, because the things that you taught us, we use them, we remember them, and you taught us, we actually learned more in your class than we learned in any other class in our entire master's program, because you really pushed us. And so that, that kind of feedback as a teacher is really what keeps you going even when things are really difficult. So yeah, that is where I would probably date my origination of passion around instructional design and then the research, data, evaluation side of things in our sector.
Oh, amazing. I know that Jim is also a very masterful person at breaking down complex topics and into really just a way that people really understand. So I'm glad that you both are here, and you've got a lot of good insight and background into that. Can you explain a little bit more about, I had to say in your bio, data enabled data instructional design. I said data enabled a lot. What does that
Yeah.
mean to you?
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
how does that differ from traditional approaches to program development and evaluation?
So let's start by breaking down a few concepts. And Jim, I might be curious to know your definitions of these and how they might differ from mine. So, data enablement, what is it? In its simplest format, it's literally just a process that allows us to use access data to make informed decisions around important things happening in our organization. So, essentially, data enablement, data literacy, data-driven decision making, these are all really synonymous concepts, but it's basically setting up systems and processes so that we can use data in meaningful ways. And how that differs from traditional evaluation, I think we can use evaluation in a data enabled way. In fact, the data we get from evaluations informs decisions. The difference, I think, is in the timing of it. So, from my experience, traditional evaluation is something that's usually done reactively after a program is over, whereas data enablement is a process and a system that we bake into curricula and programming so that as the program is unfolding, we can see how participants are growing. We can see how participants are engaging or not in a variety of the things that we're doing so that we can adjust and be agile so that the data is really used in real time to continually improve what we're doing versus a traditional evaluation approach is like a study. Did we achieve the results? Did we get the ROI we were looking for? And that usually is done in a more summative at the end kind of way. They're all valuable. They're just slightly different ways of thinking and approaches.
I've got a couple questions for you along the way. First of all, I was a little nervous when I'm talking about it with an academic, PhD and all that. Even though I've done all that, and I've taught at Big Ten universities, and incidentally, the student feedback would go to the dean, and the dean would always call me and say, "You're making it too hard for the students. Lighten up a little bit. They're paying your salary," which is why I'm
Yeah.
with Kirkpatrick Partners and not at that
Yeah.
Big Ten university.
Mhm.
But anyway, you're talking about data enablement, and I'm going to be asking you in just a minute, what do you mean by data, first of all? But then
Sure. Yeah.
I'm hearing this from, with your background. And then I'm pretty sure, Alaina, I heard you use the words unfolding and you could see. Okay.
Mm-hmm.
Now that
Mm-hmm.
made me brighten up a little bit because not all data uh, metrics. It sounds like seeing something is not necessarily synonymous with we have metrics to prove that the numbers. Is that true?
Yeah, I like to think that we can use all kinds of data artifacts to be able to get visibility in what's actually happening. And it depends on what's most important. Sometimes we want to know, because I mean, if we don't have people engaging in our programs and the way that we've designed them to engage in the program, well, then we're not going to get any results because they have to engage in the program in the minimum viable way to get the outcome. So of course we need to see things like how are people participating and getting visibility into that. We look at data artifacts, especially with technology tools that we use these days. But then also we can get visibility into the growth in our traditional knowledge, skills, and attitudes as people are engaging in our programming. That evolution of growth is happening, and sometimes it can happen in a matter of 10 minutes or an hour. And so figuring out how do we strategically collect the right data artifacts to help us see, as you mentioned, Jim, what's going on, whether it's engagement, which is a metric, but it's also an important indicator of are we moving in the right direction, or growth or changes in thinking, etc., that give us clues that we're moving in the right direction. And that's the data enablement side of things, is like, are we moving in the right direction? What clues or evidence do we have that tell us we're moving in the right direction? And if we're not moving in the right direction, how do we pivot? And so, another benefit of the data is hopefully insights that tell us how can we adjust or improve to become more effective.
And this is wonderful. You're talking about all this as an ongoing kind of thing, rather than the traditional smile sheet at level 1, a knowledge test at level 2, and a 90-day survey at level 3. And that we're just trying our best to just say that is not the way to do it, because two things that we're seeing is people decide on what methods and tools they're going to use, mostly from tradition. And we're all saying, what information you want, Alaina, to do all the things you're saying, and then what kind of methods and tools do we use to get that, and also relying on single source data to make draw conclusions and make decisions about. That is something that is so prevalent out there, and we are really trying to do our best to say we're trying to get as close to reality in the classroom and in the workplace in order to do the things that you did, and that is to see what is working and what isn't working, rather than just hope at the end somehow we got a grand ROI or something.
Yeah. And I love what you just said about methods. I don't believe we should be picking our measurement methods first. And I think that's one of the big problems. And I love that Kirkpatrick, like when the last corporate job that I had, my boss came to me and was like, so which level of evaluation are you going to be using? And I was like, shouldn't you be asking me what questions I'm asking? Right. And so I think, the Kirkpatrick leveling is used in some ways. You would probably agree with me. It's not being used in ways that help us to get the right data, to make sure that we have the right tactics. And so I don't believe we should pick a measurement method first. I believe we need a strategy. And Vanessa, I'm skipping way ahead to the last question I know you have for me, so I'll just leave it there. But I feel like we lead with methods and we don't lead with strategy, and that creates a huge gap and overcomplicates. We're trying to fit a square peg in a round hole by picking a method first over what strategy are we using to align our data collection with the outcomes of our program, and then design those things together. So you're speaking my language. Woohoo!
So are you. And you're also, you have a kind of disarming way about you. You're being very bold for the mission. And there may be some that certainly will disagree with you and say, well, you're an academic. No, you are breaking down this model, your model, whatever we're talking about, into something that is practical. And how long we were having people, for instance, they all say, how do we do a level 3? And then we'll never get to level 4. I'll say, well, no, that's not how it works. And things that you're saying about when you're seeing things unfolding. To me, what I'm picturing is people are performing their job better. Okay, that's level 3 with all the drivers and the help they need. But things then start to unfold and appear that are reactions and responses to what they're doing at level 3. And it's always a perfect example of level 3 is just a half a step from the beginning of level 4. You're doing something. It's we're starting to see some hope, starting to see some traction. There's your level 4. It's just now a continuous process to go up to higher levels of the results you're looking for.
Yep, that's right. And one other thing that I'll say, Jim, and for Vanessa too, I actually left academia. So I had this grand mission that I was going to get a doctorate degree. I love research. And I went down the path. I got years of teaching behind me, which, oh my gosh, was such a good experience. And the further down the academic path I went, the more I realized that it wasn't practical. And I'm a big believer in practice and practical application and usefulness. And I just felt like the world of academia wasn't practical enough. I wasn't able to apply what we were learning in research in real life. So I left and I worked for nonprofits and I worked in corporate and now I work for myself. And so the academic world has set me up for success in ways I can't even describe.
Sure.
But I left that world for, I think, reasons that you would agree with. Yeah. Yeah.
Absolutely. So can you share any real life examples where you've seen this data-enabled instructional design significantly impact that effectiveness of the program?
Mm-hmm. Yeah. So what I want to say, Vanessa, is that this data enablement approach is kind of like an ADDIE model or a SAM model or any methodology that would guide your instructional design. This is not something that we add at the end. In fact, this is why I am not a fan of the ADDIE model and I think a lot of people are moving away from this and it's being talked about more commonly now. But evaluation is just not something that should be the end. It's literally something that we should lead. Our needs analysis, if done correctly, gives us all the data artifacts and measures or metrics that we need to monitor if our program was successful along the way and at the end. But if we design opportunities for data collection and we bake them into our curriculum, that's really what the data enablement side of things is. You're building systems inside your curricula. It's not something that exists separately. It literally is built into the learning experience, meaningful data collection opportunities that you can systematically monitor what growth, change, what reaction are people having to your program in real time. So that's functionally how it works. Examples, I have two. One is it's called the Connected Balance Experience. One of my clients was originally working with tech startups, and she recognized that leaders in tech startups were feeling insecure about their decisions. And from her experience being in the tech startup world for many years, she realized that people needed help making more informed decisions that were more intuitive and influenced by internal factors versus external factors, AKA what everybody else tells you to do. And so basically, she had 4 different what I call milestones, and we'll talk more about that later, but she had 4 clear milestones of growth opportunities for people to make better decisions. And so each of those milestones we translated into a strategic question to help us see at baseline and at every week, because her program was weekly. Every week we checked in with people, and then we added a question at a different milestone to help us see how are people using the growth tools, how were they using them before, and linking that back to essentially how much are people looking inward versus outward and what kind of influences are impacting their decision making. So for example, the very first class we met and people had an opportunity to fill out a question that was, tell me about a time when you made a decision that you felt was really well done. You were pleased with the outcome. How did you make that choice? Now tell me a time when you made a decision where you weren't happy with the outcome of that decision. How did you go about making the decision? So we had the whole class do this. We used a technology tool that allowed us to pull themes out of the digital responses. And so we could see where keywords were being repeated, thematic analysis of some of the things that were being said on repeat. And then Kathy, who was leading the program, was able to say, it looks like this group is using a lot of external influences versus internal influences. And it introduced the program of what are the influences that we consciously and subconsciously look toward as we make decisions. And then those same questions were asked throughout the program to see how people were making decisions and how the changes in influences were changing the outcomes of their decisions. So we also asked questions like, how satisfied were you with the decisions that you made in the last week? From a pick list, what influences did you lean on as you made decisions? So we had qualitative and quantitative data that we collected throughout the program, and then the facilitator could adjust the program based on people's responses and can see as they're telling their stories and answering our quantitative questions, how their perspectives and actions are changing throughout the program.
Wow.
I have another example, but I could literally talk about this all day long, as you can see.
So tell me, before we get to the other example, what are some technology tools that you use in order to do this? Because I can certainly see this being something that people that want to be able to do. They're just not sure, what do I need in order to execute on something like this?
Yeah. And the great thing about technology is that we can use it in a virtual environment or we can use it in a real life environment because everybody's got a smartphone. And if someone doesn't have a smartphone, they probably have their laptop with them from work. So everyone's got some sort of device that they can use in a seminar that's meeting in person or in a virtual classroom environment. And so the tools that we used, and this could be any, but we used house space. We used the tool because we wanted people to engage synchronously and asynchronously. And so we wanted a place that people could come back to continue engaging with each other as a community, but then also with the content. But you could also use something like Typeform as another really inexpensive tool that allows you to collect quantitative and qualitative data and allow you to show in real time how people are responding to whatever kind of question. So you can use that information in your live training to then debrief. Here's how people answered the question. Here's where they're struggling. When I teach conferences, I do quick needs assessments, and I show as people are reporting. I use poll everywhere as one option. Aha Slides also has it. There's tons of technology tools that people can use to capture data, show it in real time, and then use it to facilitate relevant and personalized discussions. And that's just, for a 1-hour workshop, but you could do it for a 6-month-long program. And that's the other example that I have as a longer term leadership program, which again, we can dive into, or we can
I
move
would love
on.
to.
I'll let you all decide.
I would love sorry, Jim, I just cut in there, but I would love to dive deep on the leadership program because that's a big thing, right, Jim? We get a lot of this question from folks is we have this leadership development program, but we're not really getting the results that we need, or we're not really not sure how to measure its impact. And so I'd love to hear from you how your client was able to do that.
So in a leadership development example, and Vanessa, you're absolutely right. Leadership is an example of a soft skill. Jim, I'm sure you've heard this a million times. We can't measure soft skills. It's too difficult. And I call BS on that. Usually what's missing in the measurement side of things is, and Jim, you talk about this in your books, we don't have the clarity on what's the business outcome from that leadership development program. And then we furthermore don't have clarity on what actions, performance, behaviors people should be doing differently because of the leadership development program. And so without that, that's the strategy that I mentioned earlier. So without clarity on that, you can't, whether you use the Kirkpatrick model and you're linking all 4 levels together to show a chain of evidence, that's great. If we don't know what we're looking for, then we can't design a program to influence that, and we surely can't measure the outcome. So we have to know really clearly what's the business outcome, and maybe you don't know the business outcome. Maybe you at least need to know the behavior change, the whether it's actions, attitudes, skills. I don't even measure knowledge. Jim, you might not like that I'm saying this, but I
don't mind that at all. Enough already with the knowledge.
Yeah.
You can get the knowledge with a push of a button on your phone. Why? That's
right. That's right. What people really need is practice and feedback in terms of their behaviors. And so, so the example, now that we've got, okay, how do we measure leadership? Well, first we have to know, what are we measuring and what are we designing to influence? If we don't know that, then you're not going to get any outcomes. You'll be a waste of money, in my professional opinion. So this particular program was, I don't know the exact months. I think we're probably looking at a 3 to 6 month program. And they met bi-weekly, which in my definition of bi-weekly is every other week. And so there were, I know you could go either way on that one. So it was 3, and again, I've mentioned milestones. I believe all training, learning should be broken into growth milestones. And sometimes that can be broken into topic, but usually it's you're developing some clear kind of skill set or attitude that is like a step ladder. You work on one because it's the foundation for you to make the next milestone easier because the other one was done. So your traditional scaffolding. So this program was done in that way. It had 3 milestones that were scaffolded. And so one was more about personality and self-awareness. So we were measuring growth in self-awareness. The next was psychological safety and the ability to identify if an environment is psychologically safe and how to work toward facilitating psychological safety. And then the next one was more about driving engagement. So we had really clear milestones. We believed that self-awareness led to you being able to identify and facilitate psychological safety, which then enabled you to be able to drive engagement. Again, these were all leaders in an organization. So what was interesting is that we didn't have a business outcome because we were piloting this. So we didn't know what was going to change in the business. We just knew from leaning on academic research that those core components were essential, and the facilitator had done a needs analysis to know that there were problems with people not feeling psychologically safe. There were, anecdotes of a lack of self-awareness among the leadership team. So we knew that those were important things. And what we wanted to do ultimately was build a culture of habit building and help people in the end to build habits to work individually in the ways in which they needed to build self-awareness, psychological safety, and drive engagement based on their own skill sets and experiences. So the data enablement side of things came in, and this is great because they were already doing bi-weekly leadership meetings. And I suggested, why don't you record them? And what was happening inside of those leadership meetings was that people were processing the work that they had done around some of the self-awareness tools and the self-exploration. They were processing some of the psychological safety concepts because the training was synchronous and that they were meeting bi-weekly, and then asynchronous and that they were doing work on their own and processing it as a group. So we recorded those. I used Otter AI, which is one of my favorite recording tools that allows you. Yeah, I think Otter's AI is actually better than ChatGPT 4 for synthesizing doing thematic analysis, sentiment, etc. So for every single leadership meeting, we broke down the series of questions to help us understand how were people understanding and thinking about the concepts, how were they talking about and practicing certain behaviors, and how did they feel about the concept. So I tried out a series of questions with, I used both ChatGPT 4 and Otter AI. And then In Vivo is the old school qualitative analysis tool. They also have a way to use AI, but it was too cumbersome. So I used Otter because it was actually the easiest and had the best outcome in terms of spitting back relevant outcomes from the questioning. So I asked it questions like, how are people feeling about psychological safety? And sometimes I had to refine the question, and sometimes I would ask follow-up questions, but it basically gave us some themes and some ideas of how people were thinking, practicing, and feeling about each of these concepts. And then I had our designer say, how did you expect people to think about? How do you expect them to understand and discuss these topics? How do you expect them to be practicing these things in the office space? How do you expect them to feel? And so then we compared her expectations versus what was actually happening. And the outcome of that will help her obviously change how she's designing the program. But one of the benefits, and this is where the agileness comes into play, she didn't really know how best to help the leaders build habits. And so what we discovered were some of the ways in which people were already building the practice of self-awareness and facilitating psychological safety. And so we got a couple of the group, there were two different groups. We summarized all of the practices for each of the milestones and then let people see, here are the things you're already doing. Here are the things you said you'd like to do. Which of these do you believe would help you to better serve your teams and the organization? And so then they'll go do individual development plans around habit building that will be supported. But all of that was just a simple using AI and cross-checking expectations versus what was actually unfolding, to your favorite word, Jim, in the sort of learning and what people were processing from those concepts and the activities that they had done. So it was a great sort of no goal evaluation example, which we did on purpose to help us then figure out how do we refine the program and build a better evaluation system going forward, because this will be something that this particular leader does regularly. So,
Alaina, you're an enigma to me. I gotta tell you. Look, I write down these words, a bunch of words. They're just as they're popping by, and couple of things I want to say. One is you will be a great addition to the summit and to our industry, because for the longest time we have been researchers of best practices,
mm-hmm.
not the kind of things that you are talking about. And I know, Vanessa is leading us now into a stronger, more pure research path, the kind of the things you're talking about. I've written down a lot of things, but I'm going to hunt you down at the summit because I want to talk to you more. And not
Please
so much
do.
about these kind of things that overwhelm me a little bit. I almost went to a second page, but I thought, no, I got enough on one. But I want to find out about your pathway of passion. I wrote POP. I said I've never seen that before. I just made it up. But it's not so much the information that you have that others could leverage, but I want to know how have you done this? And Vanessa and I talk about this a lot. We're wanting people to make a move, time to make a move and to make a difference, and knowing we're nearby. And obviously you're on that pathway. And I know that you've got some things that are intangibles that I want to know more about, because that's what we want people to do, is to do something, take a bold path. Obviously you're not shy about taking a path or going against the grain, and neither are we. But I'm gonna find you and kind of sneak off and probe you a little bit about your pathway of passion, because there's something in there for me and for others too.
Well, I look forward to that conversation.
What I wanted to ask, actually on that same note is, this can sound very overwhelming, right? Especially for that designer to be like, I actually don't know the answer of like how to help them in a world where we feel like we have to know the answer. And that in and of itself is such a great lesson, right? Is that we can say we don't actually have the answer, and to know we might need some assistance. If someone wanted to take that first step, like Jim was just saying, in order to start, doing some of this work, what would you say is the best first step?
Yeah. Well, I came prepared with a few things that I think are really important. The first step is just acknowledging that the status quo isn't working anymore. And we need a major mindset shift in both how we design and how we evaluate or measure or calculate the outcomes, whatever your flavor of terminology is. And the mindset shift for me, and people are talking about this on LinkedIn, people have written books about it. In fact, I have a book coming out, and I love, as a researcher, it's been drilled into me that you do not put anything new into the world unless it's been thoroughly researched by all the work that's come before you. And so I have read a lot of things that others, including the Kirkpatricks and the Phillips and others, have written. One statement was said in 1995, maybe, or could have been 97, in the book Performance Consulting. I think the Phillips were co-authors of that book. And they basically said, before the tech boom and the AI and all the craziness that we have access to today, they said, if teachers, instructional designers, trainers do not think more like performance consultants, we will be left behind. And I think what's happening now is that there's a shift where and you've heard of maturity models. There's a variety of maturity models, whether it's digital or it's strategy, all in the education sector, the learning and development sector. And what we're seeing is this great divide. And this is what happens when a shift is about to happen, is that we have people who are very mature in their structure and their service and their function, and we have those that are not. And what will really be of greatest service to our entire industry is if those that are on the more mature scale are mentoring and supporting and offering guidance. And tactically, I think we've got a lot of great theory in the world, and we are missing the tactics, the real small, simple strategies to get people more mature in their actions and their thinking. And so I think that would be the question. The one thing is, what could I be doing differently to be moving toward a more mature service as a learning professional? And the question you're about to ask me, which I'm going to answer, is how do we know if we're mature or not? And I think the best indicator, if you work for a mature learning organization, is, are we a data-driven organization? Do we have the systems and tools and the thinking? And are we encouraged to collect data, to ask questions, to find out root causes of problems? Because that is what data-driven organizations do. And if you're not in an organization that is that way, because there are many of us that work in those spaces, what can you do to enable yourself to become more data-driven? And that's where I love this instructional design approach, because if we don't have access to data in organizations, we can collect it ourselves to get indicators of growth of our programs. It just takes a slight different approach. And I've got a couple of things I can share. I know we could talk about this for 3 hours.
No, please share.
But we don't need to.
No, please share.
But yeah, I'll just pause. I would love to hear your thoughts on this mindset shift and this maturity gap, because
I'm
I'm
gonna
really
leave
that one to Jim.
I'm going to go with that maturity. I see what a lot of organizations, government, they claim they're mature and that they have gone, and they've got a lot of data and Spearman, Pearson coefficients, to prove that. But where I say they have failed to become mature is that they are collecting the data on level 1 and level 2 and level 4, and they are ignoring level 3, and they're leaving things to chance. And I say a mature organization does all those things you do, but not at the absence of doing the actual performance data, where they just ignore it. They even ignore the methods that are sound and true, and like the I in ADDIE model. So many people think that's about implementing the training, and to me, it's implementing the whole package, that you design and deliver the whole package, not the training. And if they're skipping level 3, they're babies. And unfortunately, they're very proud of what they're doing, but they're not getting much done, and then they're wondering why. So I would just add that component, particularly with that model, not skipping 3, the performance.
Yeah, and you're 100% correct. I can't tell you how many times. So I do this impact hypothesis, and it's just language that resonates with me. But it's built on the Kirkpatrick model. It's built on the Phillips model. It's built on the logic model that's out there and used in academia. So it's not anything new. It's just really simplified. And there's others that have impact maps and chain of evidence. All these things are all really similar. So when I do these workshops, every time someone is trying to create their impact map, and they do this thing that you just described, they know the business outcome, and that could be retention. It could be revenue, whatever. There's only a few real business outcomes, truly, actually. And then they want to connect how participation and training and these, business outcomes. And I said, well, there's a really core piece that's missing. And in fact, there's 2 of them. And this is where I don't capture knowledge, but I'm a really big fan of capturing growth and skills, and especially attitudes. I think affective growth is one of the most important ways in which we can support people, because if our mind is closed, if we have beliefs that are getting in the way, our behaviors will never follow. And so a lot of what training can do is to open people's minds and expand their thinking and change their attitudes. And so in the chain of evidence, we've got to link engagement in training, changes in skills and attitudes, and then that third piece, which is like, well, so what? If people change their attitude and their skills, what performance changes, what behavior changes are going to occur? And Alaina, no one is articulating that really well.
Well, let's try and do it more, because people are always concerned about attrition. Oh, we're losing people. We need to shore up our onboarding program. They're losing them later on, because the solution to that is helping people not to feel they don't matter. They're left to their own devices, and you can pump them all up with a workshop. But what's missing is the consistent caring, accountability, support when they get back to their job, because that is why people will stay. They'll stay because someone cares about me. I can see the impact that I'm contributing, rather than a program that is designed to do that. And that's a byproduct. And then say, well, let's do a better job with orienting people. That's not where the problem is. The problem is when they're just left to their own devices and they fail,
and
they feel disconnected.
Yeah. What you're describing is you have to go do the work of getting that root cause analysis. What's the real reason that people are leaving? What data artifacts can we look to get that evidence, to then figure out how do we better support people? And I'm auditing right now Rance Green's story design course. He's an A2D author and speaker. I really love Rance's work, and he's got a theater background, and his courses are just like fun. Anyway, that aside, he has an it's an assessment model that what I love about it is that he calls out training needs and non-training needs, and other people do this, right? In a variety of ways. But in his sort of discovery phase of learning design, we are listening for what is a training need and a non-training need, or if there's a business opportunity or problem, what can training do? And what else has to happen that's not training related? And so I think a lot of times, Jim, I see that we want X behavior to change, but we use training as the tool to change that behavior, which it can do. And yet it's not a training problem. It's some sort of environmental problem, a lack of consistent communication, inaccurate policies and procedures. And so we can't really get the clarity on the behavior side of things if we don't know what's the root cause. And this is all instructional design. These are all instructional design best practices that are just not consistently being followed. And I can give you a line items of why instructional designers aren't following best practices, not because they don't know about them. That's not the problem. They're not supported in doing them, which goes back to the maturity of the organization that they're working in. It's this very interesting cycle that we're challenged by right now.
And human nature is a foe in this case, because human nature will say, I am going to do what's familiar and comfortable and maybe easier to do, to design a training event than those other things. And they're not bad people. It's just easier to do what is being supported. And that is the fallacy that training and learning is sufficient to get the job done. And it isn't, and it never will be.
Right. That's right.
You're a pleasure to talk with. I'm going to have to take a few deep breaths after we're done here. That's a compliment.
Oh, thank you.
Alaina, can you share a little bit more about what to expect at the Kirkpatrick Summit?
Yeah. And these, I'm going to do both because I want to share like the things that I think are so important. And it's going to be my job to model this. So my goal in this summit is to create a learning experience that models data-enabled instructional design. And so doing what you call is like a macro micro, where like you have an experience and then we drill into what did you just experience, and we talk about how that works. And so my goal is to have 3 small activities that demonstrates data enablement. And cool. Then I'll show like the tools that I used and how to make the data collection and the analysis easier, because that's also another problem that I think a lot of folks experience is they use tools like Zoom polls. That's great. Zoom's got polls built in. We want to have an engagement tool. Yes, some of that information can be helpful in the moment, but if you want to use it later to then accumulate that with other data to tell a story, it's a nightmare to get data out of Zoom polls. So are we using the right tools that make it easier for us to analyze our data? Yeah. So that's what to expect. But here's a couple things I want to say, because I think to your point, Vanessa, this whole conversation can be very overwhelming for somebody who's new to our our field, or even someone who's been in the field for a long time and is really stuck with the status quo. Like, our organization says, this is how we do things. I know we can do better, but I don't know how. And so I think the best thing that we could do is ask for forgiveness. Sorry if I'm saying that. And so here are the things that you can do without asking permission or having stakeholder buy-in that will go a really long way, and demonstrating that doing more of this would actually have a huge impact on how learning can support the business. So the first way, there's two of these. One is when we collect data. We need to change when we collect data. And the second is we need to change how we think about how we collect data, which I alluded a little bit to that just a few moments ago. But the first piece about when we collect data, so there's two components of that. One is it's status quo, that we think of when we collect data as pre and post. That would be your traditional evaluation approach. And that is okay, but not great. And getting the insights we need to show how growth and change are happening in the program. Instead of thinking of a pre-post, when you collect data based on when you anticipate key growth milestones taking place inside of your program. So my hypothesis, Jim, is that it's really difficult for people to get business outcome data and sometimes even performance change data back on the job. And if we can just prove that people have grown their skills and changed their attitudes, or maybe even that they can perform in a training environment, it gives us the indicator that they have a high chance of doing that performance on the job. Now, we can't control the environment, but we can at least see that they're able to perform in the way that we want them to, and collecting data and clues to prove that. So we need to collect data based on growth milestones, not pre and post. And ideally, if you have the opportunity, that the other growth milestones are outside of the training classroom, their growth is happening back on the job, and we want to collect that data too. I know it's really difficult for a lot of people to get access to that, because that requires, relationships with other departments and understanding where the data lives, and that can be really challenging. But we can collect data to show performance changes inside of the learning program. We just have to design it differently. So think about growth milestones, not pre and post. The other thing about when to collect data, everybody always pushes back. Alaina, no one responds to surveys anymore. Survey fatigue, blah, blah, blah. And I'm like, yeah, the problem? You're emailing them. Why don't you collect the data when you have them in your hands? So build in data collection opportunities when you got people live, when I'm in my virtual meeting, when I'm doing my live seminar, when people are, if they're doing e-learning, if they're watching a video, have something pop up that while they're engaging right there in the moment. Don't wait until after they're done and they've already forgotten about you, because that's why we get 15 or 25% survey responses when you email them or you do that at a later time. Do it in the moment where they're most motivated and engaged and energized. That will give you a 75 to 100% completion rate. I've tested this. And so when we collect data should not be after the fact, it's baked into the experience of learning. So that's the when detail. Now here, the last thing I want to say is how we collect data, because this is a really big mindset shift. In the world of research, which is where most of us have understood concepts about data, is from academic research or just research in general. Researchers take data from us. If you've ever participated in some kind of study, you're giving your data, they're taking it from you, and there's nothing that's being given in return. Maybe an Amazon gift card or maybe some swag. And people don't like that. I mean, maybe if you like, I love Red Threads Research. They are a nonprofit. They do research on instructional design, evaluation methodologies in our industry. I love their work, and I will give them my data and insights all day long because I believe in what they're doing. But most of the people you're asking to collect data, they don't believe in you in the same way that I just described how I believe in Red Threads. You don't have trust and rapport with them. And we don't give anything back. That's why employee engagement surveys are so low, because people usually don't see what happens with that data. And so therefore the trust in giving more data goes away and down and down. So how do we do it differently? We think about when we collect data, and when we take data, we have to give something back and give it back in the moment. So why I loved the example of the Connected Balance program, the one that I mentioned earlier in our conversation, we collected data at the beginning of the program and we consistently used that, whether we gave people feedback based on what they shared that would help them improve, whether we use that data to then show where the group sits and on a map, and then we could pair weak people with strong people in a mentor way. So use the data and give participants something in return and build that into your design. And you will have so much trust and rapport with the people who are giving you data. They're going to want to do it again because they're getting something from it. And they're going to want to be more accurate because they're not afraid that they're going to be penalized by giving the data. So show how you're using the data, give them something back in return, do that consistently, and the quality of the data you get will be so much better forevermore.
This was really insightful for me. I love the growth milestone concept. I know you and I have chatted. I don't remember if we had chatted so much about that, but I thought that was really great. And it's making me think a little bit differently of some my own projects and even like our own certification programs. So I really appreciate that. Where can our listeners connect with you?
So LinkedIn is my platform of choice, and we do a weekly industry leader chat on Thursdays where we break down core concepts, and they're 15 minutes. So Jim, to your point about slow processors, it can be really easy to get in the weeds on topics, especially when you're as passionate as I am. And so it's a great opportunity to get like one clear call to action for some challenge that we're all experiencing. That's the goal of our Thursday chats. I translate that into articles. And then I have a weekly e-publication that goes out Saturdays so that you can nerd out over the weekend, get your favorite morning or afternoon beverage. And I have 5 features that I put out every Saturday really early.
No
so
kidding.
that folks
Wow.
can dive in. Yeah.
I love that.
Yeah.
Lena, thank you
LinkedIn is
so
where you
much.
can find it.
Yeah, seriously, those chats are really good. And 15 minutes, who can't spare a few 15 minutes? Lena, thank you so much for being here. Jim, always a pleasure to see your beautiful shining face. Friends, make sure you connect with us on LinkedIn. Sign up for the summit. You are not going to want to miss all of this amazingness. And make sure you like, share, and subscribe. And we will see you on the next podcast. Bye, y'all.